My name is Owen Carter. I'm 34 years old, and for the past 9 years, I've worked as a foreign security contractor, the kind of job that sounds a lot more exotic than it actually is. For the last 9 months, I was stationed in a nameless desert, the kind you only see on classified satellite maps and in nightmares. I've slept in dirt-floored tents, eaten food cold from tin cans, and spent more nights listening to the sound of distant artillery than I have to music. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for what waited for me at home. My wife, Marissa, and I lived in a small 2-story house outside of Raleigh, North Carolina. We'd moved there 3 years ago, when I was transitioning from military service to private contracts overseas. Marissa wanted a garden. I just wanted peace. We never really argued, at least not loudly. Our marriage was like a tightrope, stretched taut, balanced by short texts, voice messages, and occasional late-night calls that always ended with, "I miss you." She was everything I thought I didn't deserve. Calm, clever, beautiful in a quiet way. The kind of woman who reads by candlelight and listens to classical music while cleaning the kitchen. We didn't have children, not for lack of trying, just timing. The job always came first. I told myself it was temporary. 9 months abroad felt like a lifetime. I missed her so badly that I kept an old photo of us tucked into my vest, the one from our honeymoon in Vermont. Her smile in that picture was the kind that made you believe the world could be quiet, even if only for a moment. So when the assignment ended early, I booked the first flight home without telling her. I wanted to surprise her. I even stopped by the airport florist and bought white tulips, her favorite. I remember the moment I stepped out of the cab in front of our house. The grass was overgrown. The lights were off, even though it was already dusk. The porch light, the one I always left on when I was away, was burned out. But that didn't worry me. Not yet. I walked up the steps, heart pounding like a drum. I rang the bell. No answer. So I reached for the spare key under the flower pot, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. Marissa was standing in the hallway. Her eyes went wide like she'd seen a ghost. Then her lips trembled, and she whispered the words that stopped me cold. "Don't take off your shoes. He's upstairs." My brain froze. My hand was still on the doorknob. The flowers fell to the floor. She didn't say anything else, just backed into the shadows, like she hoped I wouldn't press further. But her eyes said everything. She wasn't scared for me. She was scared of me. And that's when I realized this wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was intentional. I didn't speak, didn't yell. I just turned, walked out, and closed the door behind me as quietly as I had entered. I didn't even look at the window to see if she was watching me go, because if I had, I might have broken right there on the porch. Instead, I walked down the street, heart racing, throat burning with bile, and I kept walking for blocks with no idea where I was going. My duffel still in the cab, my home no longer my own. It's strange how betrayal doesn't feel like a slap. It feels like silence. It creeps in like smoke, choking you without making a sound. I ended up at a 24-hour diner near the gas station, where Marissa and I used to stop on Sunday mornings. We'd sit at the counter, share pancakes, argue over crossword clues. Now, I sat alone, hands shaking, coffee untouched. "Long night?" the waitress asked gently. I gave her a tight smile. "Just got home." She smiled and poured me a refill. "Well, welcome back." Welcome back. Those 2 words were a knife, because I didn't know what home meant anymore. I didn't go back to the house that night. Or the next. I stayed in a cheap motel 2 towns over, room 212, with buzzing fluorescent lights and a stained comforter that smelled of bleach and loss. I didn't call her, didn't text. I just lay in bed staring at the ceiling, hearing her voice over and over again. "Don't take off your shoes. He's upstairs." And I wondered, how long? Was it recent? Or had it been happening during those lonely midnight calls, the ones where she said she was just tired and didn't want to talk? Was he some stranger? Or someone I knew? I didn't want answers, but I knew I needed them. If you're still watching this story, and you're feeling what I'm feeling right now, that slow build of dread and heartbreak, then consider subscribing. There's more to come, and I promise, it only gets deeper. The next day, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I broke the rules. Security protocol says no surveillance of civilians unless authorized. But I wasn't a contractor right now. I was a husband with a broken chest and too many questions. So I watched. I parked down the street from the house at 6:47 a.m., sipping gas station coffee and waiting. At 7:03 a.m., the front door opened. He stepped out. Tall, early 40s, expensive-looking coat. He kissed her goodbye. Then he got into my truck, the one I'd left behind, keys with Marissa, because I trusted her. The truck started, drove off, and I sat there gripping the steering wheel of my rental car, knuckles white, feeling like my whole life had been replaced while I was gone. Like I'd died somewhere overseas, and they'd buried me without telling her. So she moved on. But I wasn't dead. And now, I wanted the truth. Not for closure, but for justice. It took everything in me not to follow him that morning. The man who walked out of my house, kissed my wife on the mouth like he'd earned it, then drove away in my truck, like my entire life had been loaned to him while I was overseas. But I didn't follow. Not yet. Because part of me wasn't ready to find out who he really was. Not because I was scared of him, but because I was scared of what I'd do once I knew. Instead, I waited. I parked in the same spot the next morning, same time, same routine. And he came out again, like clockwork. Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Always the same pattern. He'd walk out the front door, hair still wet from the shower, coffee in hand, kiss Marissa goodbye like he lived there, like he belonged, then take my keys and drive off in my truck. By Sunday, the rage inside me wasn't even hot anymore. It was cold. Surgical. Because this wasn't a one-night mistake. It wasn't some affair sparked by grief or loneliness. This was a replacement, a full-scale emotional takeover. And the worst part? She'd made it easy for him. I finally broke on Sunday night. I stood across the street in the dark, watching the windows. The porch light was on again, freshly replaced. They were inside, curtains drawn, laughter behind the glass. I'd heard that laugh before, at our wedding, on our road trip to Maine. Now it wasn't mine anymore. I walked up the driveway like a ghost and looked in through the living room window. And there they were. She was curled up on the couch, barefoot, wrapped in the blanket I brought back from Italy. He was beside her, shirt unbuttoned, hand resting on her thigh like he'd always had the right. And then I saw it. The photo. Our honeymoon photo. The one I kept in my vest every deployment. Now sitting in a new frame on the mantel. Except that my face had been cut out. Like I never existed. I don't remember walking away. I just remember the cold air, the wind, and the sound of my boots hitting the sidewalk. And I remember what I felt next. Not grief, not heartbreak. Purpose. The next morning, I went digging. I still had access to some old recon tools from my contractor days. Nothing illegal. Not really. Just deeply frowned upon. First, I ran a facial scan on the man from the surveillance footage I took. Didn't take long to match him. Dr. Mark Keller. 42nd licensed trauma therapist. Specializes in PTSD treatment. Veteran affiliated. A consultant with private security firms. That's how they met. She had referred him to me a year ago, as a therapist, to help with my post-deployment symptoms. I never made the appointment, said I didn't have time. Apparently, he did, According to his online presence, they'd been publicly dating for 3 months. Photos of them at restaurants, a charity gala, a lake house retreat. All while I was sleeping in a tent half a world away, wondering if she was okay. I didn't eat that day, didn't speak, just stared at the screen and imagined how many of those nights I called her while she was in his bed, and how she answered anyway. I checked into a better motel on the outskirts of town, one with thick curtains and a room that smelled less like bleach and more like wood polish. I needed a base of operations, a war room, because this wasn't going to end with tears or apologies. I wasn't going to knock on the door and beg to know why. I didn't want her back. I wanted her honest. And I knew she wasn't going to give me that on her own. So I decided to take it. By the way, if this story has you leaning in, gripping your seat, wondering where it's going, hit subscribe. I've got 3 more chapters coming, and trust me, it only gets darker from here. That night, I called a friend, Liam. We'd served together. He ran a private cyber intelligence firm now. "I need a favor," I said. "You in trouble?" "No," I said. "Not yet." By midnight, I had access to every message, photo, and private email Marissa and Dr. Keller had exchanged in the last 6 months. The messages made me sick. "He won't come back early. I'm tired of hiding. I want him gone. I don't want to be his wife anymore. I want to be yours." And then, one message, dated 5 months ago, sent the day after my birthday. "I think we should tell him we're together. He deserves to know." To which he replied, "Let him find out on his own. He's too far away to matter." That's when I realized it wasn't just betrayal. It was contempt. They didn't just cheat. They plotted. They built a life on the assumption that I wouldn't return. Or worse, that if I did, I wouldn't care. They erased me before I even knew I was gone. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a soldier. I felt like a man with nothing to lose. I didn't sleep the night I read those messages. I stared at the screen until my eyes burned. Read the same lines 100 times, trying to find some part of it that didn't feel real. Some hint that it was all a misunderstanding, a lapse in judgment, something I could hate and forgive in the same breath. But it wasn't that. It was premeditated. They'd planned it, piece by piece, conversation by conversation. While I was halfway across the world, eating MREs and writing letters she never answered, she moved on. No, she invited him in, to my house, to our bed. And worst of all, she didn't even have the decency to lie well. I stood in front of our house that next morning, watching the dew fade from the lawn. The sky was soft gray, the kind that looks like it could rain or clear up, depending on which way the wind turns, just like her. I didn't ring the bell this time. I had a key. Still, she hadn't changed the locks. Part of me wondered if she wanted me to come in. Maybe she wanted the scene, the confrontation. Maybe that's how people like her measure closure, by watching the man they left crumble in real time. But I wasn't there to crumble. I was there to finish something. I opened the door quietly, stepped in. The air inside smelled like lavender and fresh paint, not the scent of our old house. Everything had been rearranged. New curtains, new furniture. Even the photo wall was different. None of our wedding photos remained. Just vacation shots. Laughter on beaches I'd never been to. Him. Her. Them. I walked to the kitchen. Empty. Then I heard the soft shuffle of bare feet upstairs. So I waited. I didn't speak. I let her come down and find me standing there, in the house she'd replaced me in. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs, mouth parted, eyes wide. "Owen!" She said my name like a ghost story, like she wasn't sure if I was real. I looked at her, the woman I had once flown halfway across the world for just to see smile. Now she was standing in front of me in a robe that wasn't hers, wearing his scent, wearing his smug scent. "You didn't call," she said after a moment, her voice soft, defensive. I almost laughed. "I was deployed," I said, my voice flat. "Not dead." She opened her mouth to say something, but I cut her off with a raised hand. "I know everything, Marissa," I said, stepping forward. "I know his name. I know what you've said to him. I know about the photo you cut me out of. I even know what he looks like half-dressed and using my toothbrush." She flinched. "Good." "You read our messages," she whispered. I nodded. "I read the part where you said you wanted me gone," I said. "Where you told him I didn't matter anymore, that I wouldn't come back, that I wasn't really part of your life." She took a shaky breath. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this, Owen. I was lonely," I said. "That's the word you're reaching for, right? Lonely?" She looked away. "I get it," I said, quieter now. "You were alone. You were tired of waiting. I was gone too much. The war came home with me more often than flowers did. But that's not the part that broke me." I stepped closer. "You know what did?" She didn't answer. "You let him call this place home." She looked back at me, eyes glassy. "What did you expect me to do?" "Not this," I said. "Not open my front door and tell me, 'Don't take off your shoes,' like I'm the stranger." There was a long silence. She folded her arms, like she was shielding herself. And then, soft as a bruise, "I didn't think you'd come back. People always say heartbreak is loud, a scream, a slap, a shattering. They're wrong. It's quiet, clinical, like hearing the final click of a lock behind you. I didn't yell, didn't curse, didn't beg her to explain. I just nodded, because I knew I'd already buried something in that moment, something I'd spent years trying to keep alive. And now, it was gone. He came home that afternoon. I was waiting on the porch when his shiny gray Audi pulled into the driveway. He stepped out with a smirk on his face, like he owned the air around him, until he saw me. Then the smirk vanished. "Doctor Keller," I said coolly. He paused, adjusting his collar. "Owen, listen!" "You don't get to say my name," I said, stepping down from the porch. "You get to listen." Once I tossed a manila envelope at his feet. Inside, printed screenshots of every message, every photo, every plan they'd made. "Keep those," I said. "Frame them. Make a scrapbook." He bent down to pick it up, but I was already walking away. "Where are you going?" he called after me. I didn't turn back. I just said, "Anywhere that isn't here." I didn't go back to the motel. I drove, for hours. No music, no calls, just the sound of tires on pavement and the beating of my own pulse. By the time I stopped, I was 2 counties away, parked at a lookout where Marissa and I once carved our initials into a bench during a weekend camping trip. They were still there, but now I understood something. Initials fade, trees rot, benches fall apart. Names don't mean anything when the people behind them stop trying, and Marissa stopped trying a long time ago. I spent the next 2 weeks driving with no destination, motels, rest stops, small diners in quiet towns where nobody knew my name. I became a ghost in my own country, a man with calloused hands and nowhere to place them. My phone buzzed every few days with messages from Marissa. "We need to talk. I'm sorry. Please don't shut me out. You left. You don't get to disappear now." I never answered, not because I didn't have things to say, but because some things lose their meaning once they're spoken out loud. I'd already heard all I needed. I'd seen the house, the photos, the man in my place. I didn't need her to tell me why. I needed to remember who I was before I started building my life around her, and I didn't like what I found. You see, I used to believe I was a protector. That war made me hard, yes, but only on the outside. Inside, I told myself I was still that small-town boy from Missouri who wanted to do something honorable, who signed up for the army because he believed in causes, flags, and second chances. But somewhere along the way, I became a placeholder in my own life. Work came first. I rationalized every absence, every missed anniversary, every quiet dinner eaten over Zoom, because I told myself, she understands. She knows I'm doing this for us. But people don't live off intention. They live off presence. And the truth is, I wasn't there. Not when she started to slip away. Not when someone else slipped in. I stopped in a mountain town in West Virginia, just a strip of gas stations, bait shops, and a local bar called The Foundry. I rented a small cabin behind an old veterans lodge and told the man at the counter I was just passing through. He didn't ask questions, which is exactly what I needed. Every morning, I chopped wood for the fire I never lit. Every night, I walked the trail up the ridge and watched the sun sink behind the trees. No phone, no noise, just the steady whisper of my own breath and the dull ache in my chest that no bullet had ever caused. It was there, on that ridge, that I finally let myself fall apart. And I didn't break like a man screaming at the stars. I broke like a man unwinding quietly, piece by piece. One evening, I found a message in my voicemail. It was him. Keller. Owen, listen. I'm not calling to explain. I know you don't want that. I just want you to know I didn't plan it. We connected. She needed someone and I was there. I'm sorry, man. I really am. I played it twice, then deleted it. Because when a man says, I was just there, what he means is, I saw a window and climbed through it. That wasn't an apology. It was a confession of convenience. If you're still here, still feeling this story, then you know this isn't just about betrayal, it's about rebirth. Subscribe if that's the kind of story you want more of. Not just pain, but what comes after it. About a month after I left, I got a letter in the mail forwarded from my old address. It was from Marissa, a real letter, ink and paper. She wrote that she was moving, that the house was too heavy with memory, that she and Keller were no longer together. He'd needed space, and she realized she was chasing comfort, not love. She said she understood if I never spoke to her again, that she hoped I found peace wherever I was. There was no return address, just a signature. No love, no goodbye, just Marissa. I folded the letter, set it on the firewood pile, didn't burn it, didn't frame it, just let it sit there, like a relic from a past life. The next day, I packed my bag and left the cabin. I didn't leave out of anger. I left because the silence had done its job. I'd stared into the cold enough to feel the warmth I still had left, and I was ready to build again, not to go back, not to fix anything, but to start something new, from scratch. I drove until the mountains flattened into hills, until the cities turned to open land. I found a small town just outside Asheville, North Carolina, bought a fixer-upper with my savings, a house with chipped paint, a porch that creaked, and a garage perfect for tools I didn't own yet. And I started rebuilding, not the house, myself. Every nail I drove was an act of defiance, every repaired board, a reclaiming of identity. I didn't care if the walls were crooked. They were mine. 3 months passed. The house was slowly becoming a home, the kind of home that didn't have shadows in the corners, the kind where no one whispered behind closed doors, just wood, sweat, and peace. I adopted a dog from the shelter, a nervous black mutt with sad eyes and a limp. His name was Bishop. The vet said he probably wouldn't make a good guard dog. I didn't need one. I wasn't afraid anymore. Bishop followed me everywhere, into the workshop, around the yard, even up to the ridge behind the house where the stars always looked a little too close. When I sat in silence, He leaned into me like he knew I carried something heavy. He didn't ask questions, and I didn't need to explain. One Sunday afternoon, I was in the garage fixing an old radio when a voice called out from the porch. "Mr. Carter?" I looked up. A teenage boy stood there holding a clipboard, skinny, nervous, wearing a ball cap from a local school. "I'm from the high school down the road," he said. "We're doing a Veterans Appreciation project, and someone in town said you used to serve." I paused, wiped the grease off my hands. "Used to," I said. "Yeah. We're just gathering stories," he continued, "about what it was like, what you remember most." I stared at him for a second too long. Then I nodded and said, "Give me a minute." I walked inside, poured myself a glass of water, sat at the kitchen table. I didn't want to tell him about the sandstorms or the firefights or the silence of coming home to a locked door. I wanted to tell him the truth. So I wrote, "What do I remember most?" Not the medals, not the missions. I remember the feeling of walking into a house that used to be mine and realizing it no longer recognized me. I remember the sound of my wife's voice, low and careful, telling me not to take off my shoes. Because he, the man she replaced me with, was upstairs. But I also remember this. I didn't scream. I didn't shatter anything. I left. And then I rebuilt. Not out of revenge, out of survival. That's the thing no one tells you about betrayal. It's not the pain that ruins you. It's the part where you have to live with it afterward. And you can live with it. You just have to decide that what comes next isn't about them. It's about you. I folded the letter, walked back out, and handed it to the kid. "You sure about this?" he asked, reading the first line. "Yeah," I said. "If you're going to tell stories, tell the real ones." He nodded, tucked it into his folder, and left. And just like that, something inside me settled. Weeks later, I got another letter, this time from a name I hadn't seen in a long time. Marissa. I stood at the mailbox for a long time before opening it. The letter was short. "Owen, I saw your story in the school paper. They printed your words almost word for word. Brave of you to say it like that." I cried when I read it, not because I want forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know I left North Carolina. I'm moving to Oregon, trying to figure out who I am without you. I think I owe you that much. I'm sorry for all of it. There was no number, no return address, just silence. And for the first time, it felt right. That evening, I walked up the ridge behind the house with Bishop trotting beside me. The wind was sharp, the trees whispering. I sat on a flat stone and looked up at the sky. There was no anger left, no longing. Just breathe, just stillness. The kind I used to chase across deserts and deployments, only to find right here in this quiet corner of Carolina dirt. You asked me once, what came after the betrayal? This is what came after. Not revenge, not redemption. Just a man, a dog, a house on a hill, and a life that finally feels like mine. The end.